Good morning. I feel kind of like a dog that's got a leash on for the first time. This is weird. All right, so I have done a lot of different things over the years. I've had a very uh, non-traditional education and a very unusual career path. But I'm up here today because one of the things that I've done is I worked in executive protection. I was a bodyguard. Um, and you can split that subject into two broad categories. What most people seem to think of when they think of bodyguards or executive protection is the first category I got, which is big, intimidating guys that stand around and scare people. Um, that's the most common thing people see. That's actually kind of a small part of the overall job. We also have threat assessment, which is what's on the back end that people typically don't see as much. Oh, am I on camera? I'm on camera. Okay. There should be like an X or something. Um, so, threat assessment, understanding the psychology, human behavior, and the predator-prey relationship is actually a really large part of the subject. And this is stuff that y'all can apply to daily life. Um, so what we're going to kind of talk about a little bit is how you can really be your own bodyguard, how you can take some personal responsibility to keep yourself safe, because most people can't afford a bodyguard all the time, and it's really not necessary. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to make yourself a harder target, understanding the interview, which is 80 to 90% of self-awareness, and establishing healthy boundaries. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so we got a verse, Matthew 10:16. I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves, therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. So we want to try to use some judgment when we're acting with other people, especially strangers, but even when we're selecting who we let in our lives, we want to use some discernment there and not just let anybody in who says they want in. Now, when I was working as a bodyguard, I got a lot of strange phone calls. I got some very intense phone calls. I've had people call me. Now I'm bloody self-conscious about where I'm standing. I've had people call me because they were bleeding. I've had people call me because someone broke into their house. I've had some really strange phone calls. But the worst phone call that I got, the very worst one, was actually the very first phone call that I got. And the first phone call I got was for a kidnapping. Somebody called me because they had gone home. This guy had a normal habit of going home every day to have lunch with his wife and his two kids. But this day, when he got home to have lunch with his wife and his two kids, instead of finding his family, he found a bunch of police officers that he didn't know. The door had been kicked into his house, and he didn't know what was going on. So after a long day of dealing with this, he called me at 11 o'clock at night to ask for my help. And really, you call a bodyguard before there's a kidnapping, not after, so it wasn't a great fit, but it was the best he could do. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, and I don't have time to tell the whole story, is because he actually had a lot of information before the event took place that could have helped him avoid the event, but he either didn't know how to process it or he ignored it. And this happens a lot when we're dealing with people. So sometimes when we're dealing with people, we'll get a bad feeling about something, we'll get kind of a signal that something's wrong, and people will either dismiss it, because they don't know what to do with it or because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, and they'll ignore it. And we're going to talk a little more about that. So as he was kind of telling me what happened or what he thought happened, the first thing that came up was there was a rumor that his wife had a first husband and he was supposed to be dead. And there was a lot of detail about the guy, some stuff I don't want to go into, but as the police were looking at this whole thing, it turned out the guy might actually not be dead. So he was the first suspect they were worried about. And this was a really weird thing. As he was telling me all the things, it really seemed like there was something wrong. So we talked for a while, and then I actually called another bodyguard that I knew, and I consulted with him, and both of us were getting some feelings that something just wasn't right. In my second interview with the guy, it turned out that him and his wife were different religions, and his wife was making some really crazy accusations about him. Turned out they were having some real serious marital problems. The result of all this was his wife had actually staged the kidnapping. She had contacted a group from out of state, and they had sent someone up, and they busted in her front door, and she called a friend who she knew wasn't home, and she left a message on that friend's voicemail saying that someone was breaking into the house. That friend got home later, called the police. Police showed up. The whole thing was staged. It's a very long story. She ended up actually trying to hire a hitman to kill the guy that called me. It's a crazy story. But the point to all that is, he really got exposed to, he probably had all the information that he needed before he even married the woman. But for whatever reason, he either ignored the information or he didn't know what to process it, or he didn't have anyone in his life giving him good advice. So when we're interacting with people, when we're trying to figure things out, if we get like a bad feeling about something, if we're not sure something sounds right, don't be afraid to ask questions. We don't want to make assumptions, but it can be good to ask questions just to get more information. Our intuition about these things isn't always going to be right, but it has your best interest at heart. So sometimes you'll get a feeling about somebody or you'll think something. It won't always be correct, but that feeling, if you're getting like a danger signal, it has your best interest at heart. You should at least pay attention to it, get yourself to a place of safety, and then assess it, or maybe talk to somebody else about it. If you're interacting with somebody and they're making you uncomfortable and you're afraid to qualify things, you're afraid to ask questions, that can be a big red flag that something is seriously wrong and you need to pay attention to it. Don't ignore it. Okay, wrong button. Okay, so I mentioned intuition a second ago. We have intuition and we have instinct. Those are different things. People conflate them sometimes. Instinct is what we're born with. Most people don't have very developed instincts. We don't really need them that much in a civilized society because we don't raise ourselves. We're raised by our parents. A joke sometimes that I was raised by Korean wolves, but this is a joke. I was raised by my parents. Intuition is based on life experience. This is good and bad because sometimes sometimes we don't process things correctly. But our intuition comes from what we learn from things, what we observe. Intuition can be very difficult to articulate. So sometimes you will get a feeling about something, good or bad, but you won't be able to always explain what you're feeling. And that can make it difficult if you get like a bad feeling about somebody and you try to tell somebody else about it, but you can't put your finger on it. It can make the communication process very difficult. That's something you just have to kind of work through. Sometimes if you have a bad feeling about something and you try and explain it to somebody and they don't understand, you might just have to find the right person to talk to. Usually these things can be nailed down, but it can be a bit of a process, even for people with a lot of life experience. Our intuition is not always correct. So sometimes we will get a feeling about something, it'll be wrong, but keep in mind that feeling has your best interest at heart. So especially if you're engaging with somebody or you're doing something and you don't feel safe, you should at least initially listen to it. A really good example is sometimes you have something like somebody will walk up to an elevator and the doors will open and the person inside will be intimidating, or the person who wants to get on the elevator won't feel safe, and they'll ignore their intuition and get into a closed box with someone they don't trust and they can't articulate why, and that's not good. You don't want to be concerned about hurting that person's feelings in that case. You can act like you forgot something or look at your phone and turn around. But if you see something like that and you don't feel safe, initially you should listen to it. Once you're safe, you can evaluate it and determine, okay, was I being judgmental or was I right? And you might not know what it was that made you feel that way, and that's okay. But you want to just keep in mind your intuition has your best interest at heart. Initially, at least pay attention to it. And yeah, evaluate things when you're safe. Let's see here. Okay, you don't outsource your safety. What's my quote here? Be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. A lot of people outsource their safety. Okay, they depend on other people to keep them safe. Don't do that. Even if it's something like you're in a building and there's a fire, If you're waiting on someone else to tell you what to do, then you're dependent on their judgment. Now, if it's someone that you trust, you know they have good judgment. So if Jamie's telling you what to do, you're good. But if you're just kind of on your own and you're not sure what's going on, don't just outsource your safety. Okay, so don't just assume that the police are going to come rescue you. They might not. You got to take personal responsibility for that, because ultimately your safety is up to you. Now, if you're really young, to some extent, your parents are obviously more responsible for that. But at some point, as you go through life, your safety is going to be on you. Now, before we have any type of crime, there's always some kind of interview. Okay, it's very, very rare that criminals just randomly select a victim. It happens occasionally, but it's not the most common thing. Typically, there is some kind of interview process. Interviews can be physical, or they can be verbal. 80 to 90% of communication is body language. Okay, and this is where the intuition thing, part of that comes in. If you're interacting with people, sometimes you'll get a bad feeling or a good feeling. You might not be able to articulate it. You might not be able to articulate what you see in someone's facial features or their body language, but 80 to 90% of communication is body language. So, if a criminal is out looking for a victim, if they're looking at body language, they will look at things like your head posture. They will look at if you're looking at your phone. A lot of crimes are based off proximity, especially if the interview is physical. So if you make it really easy for someone to get close to you, you're making it much easier for them to do anything like steal your dog or whatever they're after. And we don't get to choose what their objective is. Sometimes when people think about this, they're thinking about real specific threats. You don't get to choose that. All you can do is stay alert, keep yourself safe, and minimize your contact. Because if we give body language that shows we're alert and we're paying attention, it does a lot to screen these people out, and they're much less likely to bother you. They'll go look somewhere else. This brings us to the predator-prey relationship. Let me see what my next slide is. Okay, so prey behavior will attract a predator response. If you've ever watched like a nature show where you've got lions or something hunting other animals, predators do not select the largest, strongest prey. This takes us back to the presence thing about bodyguards. The reason bodyguards establish presence, the big physical guys that intimidate people, is because it screens out possible attackers. Because they don't want to deal with strong things. They want weak victims, basically. So even in the wild, if a bunch of lions are hunting a bunch of prey animals, they will typically find like the youngest or the weakest or the sickest. That's what they're going to go after. They're not going to go after the strongest ones in the herd, ever. Human predators are very similar. Human predators are not going to assault somebody who seems very confident and alert, regardless of if they're male or female. Like if Jamie's walking around and he's paying attention, he's got his head up, nobody who's looking to commit an assault is going to bother Jamie. Now, if Jamie's walking around with his head in his phone, he's dragging his feet, and he's all slouched, there are people who would like to say that they took him out because he's a big physical guy, but they don't want to actually like go head to head with him. Does that make sense? Okay, they don't want to fight someone like that, but they might want to hurt somebody like that, and it's a big difference. Now, don't be a grass eater. So grass eater is a derogatory term that we use in like self-defense and bodyguard circles to describe people who just are not paying attention. If we go back to our predator-prey relationship, if you look at the way a lot of herbivores eat, a lot of them eat with their heads down. We don't want to be like that. When you're out in public and you go to a restaurant or something like that, you can get a pretty good idea of who is more alert and who isn't alert just by how people eat. So if you watch, people that are more alert, they'll get some food and they'll sit up and they'll look around while they eat. People that are less alert, they'll have their head down the whole time. If you had someone in that restaurant who was looking for a victim, they're going to be much more likely to select the person who has their head down the whole time, even if the crime they want to commit is going to be somewhere else. If they're like looking for someone to follow home or something like that, being alert, it screens out a lot of this stuff. Now, interviews can also be verbal. Verbal interviews are trickier because they tend to be a lot more sophisticated, or sophisticated in a different way. Verbal interviews can take months. Okay, physical interviews tend to happen really fast, or the physical portion of an interview tends to happen pretty fast. Like sometimes it just takes seconds, but verbal interviews can take a really long time. And this is typically a process where the criminal has selected somebody for whatever reason, and they're actually trying to gain their trust. They're trying to get the intended victim to dismiss their own intuition. Yeah. So, and what happens in these cases is the criminal or the abuser will approach the intended victim in a variety of ways, and that intended victim will get a bad feeling about the person, like some part of their intuition will cue off that something's wrong. But what happens is the criminal doesn't push the boundary too much. And so what the intended victim does in their head is to say, well, I felt bad about that, but nothing happened, so I'm probably just being judgmental or racist or something like that. And a lot of criminals are really good at this. A lot of abusive people are very good at this. So they'll make contact. One thing that's kind of weird, but it's important to understand is, especially with abusive people, they don't care about the quality of the contact. They just want contact. So they might even like start an argument with you or a fight or something, and it could be really ugly. They don't care. They just want contact. Even like yeah. So I had a girl come to me one time who worked at a grocery store. And you mean the ugly thing, or just the whole thing? I had a girl who worked at a grocery store, and she had a guy who was basically hitting on her. And just like every time they interacted, he kind of pushed the bubble a little bit. And she was uncomfortable about it because like nothing had happened. She felt she was trying to rationalize it. Yeah, because what they'll do is they'll find your boundaries and then they'll stretch those a little bit. But then where the psychology comes into it is they'll stretch the boundary, but they won't cross the line. So the intended victim goes, okay, I'm just being judgmental, and they start to dismiss their own intuition. In the example of that girl, I told her that the next time, because she told me the whole story, I told her the next time she saw him, he was going to make physical contact with her. And he did. And that was just, he made physical contact, but he didn't do anything else. So he just established physical contact. So he kind of got to that boundary, but then nothing bad happened, quote unquote. So he was normalizing that. Very much. Yeah, very much. And that can be, it kind of doesn't matter what the outcome they want. It's very much a grooming process, especially with verbal interviews. And yeah, we could talk about that for a really long time. I meant to open with this. If anybody has any questions after we're done, because I know this is kind of a weird subject, we'll try to make time at the end. If you have a question that you don't want to ask in front of the group, you can always approach me when I'm out in the lobby or something, or if you don't want to ask me, you can take it to Kyle, and Kyle can relay the question to me. Even if it's something you think of later, even if it's like, I don't care if it's a year or two from now, if you think something weird's happening and you don't understand it, or you need help with it. Evil can be charming. This is very important to understand because a lot of times people tend to think that the bad guy they're going to run into is going to be intimidating in whatever way you think is intimidating. And that can be a range of things for different people. But 2 Corinthians 11:14, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. A lot of successful criminals are very charming people. Sometimes they're very attractive people. Even if you look up, has anybody, I don't know if y'all ever heard of Charles Manson? We got a young crew here. If you ever look up Charles Manson online, if y'all do that, if you find pictures of him after he got convicted, he was pretty creepy looking. But before he got convicted, he was actually very clean cut. And that's just something to keep in mind. So like a lot of times with criminals, when they're grooming people or selecting people, sometimes the intended victim will dismiss the person either because they're attractive or because they have a family. That's another thing that happens. So there have actually been several criminals who did really bad things who were like married with 5 kids, and someone gets that bad feeling about them when they're interacting with them, when they're being interviewed, but they think, oh, he's married with 5 kids, he must be okay. Maybe, maybe not. Let's see here. So there's always an interview before there's an assault. That includes abusive relationships. This includes abusive work situations. Understanding this is 90% of personal safety. So even in a work situation or a school situation, if you've got a boss that's abusive or a teacher that's abusive, even if it's just verbal abuse, there is still an interview process with that because they kind of figure out what they can get away with and who they can pick on. So there will be a process where they'll figure out. And if you've ever noticed a bully at any point in your life with anything, you've probably noticed they pick on some people they leave alone. They can't always articulate why they do that, but they select their victims. And adult bullies are the same way. And even in relationships, sometimes when people get married and it's abusive, some people just don't know how to act any other way. And even there's a lot of examples of women who will get in who like had an abusive father that will select an abusive boyfriend or husband, not because they like it, because they know what to expect from it, because there's a normalcy to it. So that can be a whole cycle that has to be broken that's more complicated than what we can get into today. One thing I'll say about that, if you have a friend that gets into something like that, you got to be really careful about talking to them because you can easily, those friendships can be really tenuous. Okay. How are we doing on, what time do I need to be done? Okay. I probably won't, but now, that's a little bit about interviews. That's kind of a condensed version of one of my lectures. We're going to talk a little bit about healthy boundaries because a lot of this whole subject is about who you allow in your life. And y'all don't have complete control over who's in your life, but as you go through life, you'll have more and more control over that. And you want to be, in my opinion, you want to be fairly selective about the people you allow to be really close. Now, you might interact with people that aren't necessarily close, that you're either ministering to or working with or whatever. That's fine. But as far as the people that you really let in your circle, you want to be kind of picky about that. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? Okay. So it's up to you to set and be consistent with your boundaries. That's completely up to you. And when we're talking about like abusive people or criminals, they will try to establish the boundaries. Okay? And if you try to present a boundary, they will try to cross that, they'll test it. And again, a lot of the ones that are really clever, that are very successful criminals, they will test that boundary, they'll see how you react to it, and then they'll reassess. Unless you set like a really firm boundary and you just make it clear that you're not on the menu. Don't outsource your safety or your well-being. So if you're interacting with somebody and you get a bad feeling about them, don't count on someone else to solve that. Sometimes you have to figure out, and that might mean you decide you have to get a new job or go somewhere else or change classes. Let's see here. How do I want to? Okay. So when we talk about establishing boundaries and like who we're going to let in our life and how close we're going to let them get to us, what kind of time we're going to spend with us, there's layers to that. And I won't go in a lot of detail. Some of that is even if we got two people that are interacting and neither person is like an aggressor, like a dating situation or even friends, we got to consider like what we do and how we hang out can affect our reputation and the other person's reputation. So if a guy and a girl go somewhere and sit like privately someplace, they're going to be better off if they sit someplace where they're just visible and people can see them, then they're not really private, because then you're just less likely for people to make judgments about what people are doing. And that can be tricky. What's my next slide? So, how do I want to? Trying to decide how deep I want to go. Into the weeds. Well, okay. So I'll give an example. Um, when I first moved to Texas, I had an apartment, and my apartment was like kind of an open thing. It wasn't closed. Anybody could go in there. Anybody could go onto that property or out of the property. And one day, a girl was going door to door selling something, and she came to my apartment and she asked if she could come inside, and I said no. And the reason I said no is because once she came into the apartment and she was with me by myself, she could say anything she wanted to say. So, meaning she could leave there and call the police and said that I touched her or something weird. And it would be my word versus her word. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where it's your word versus somebody else's word. That's not, you just don't do it. So part of this, if we're talking about a dating situation, it's also like if you've got two people that want to hang out, and even if you're going to go someplace and sit, and you're going to sit on different furniture and just talk, and it's fine, people will make assumptions about what might take place if you're just alone. And you have to consider your reputation, and you have to consider the other people's reputation. And don't just assume that everybody's going to think you're being righteous. So with boundaries, we just don't want to, we want to be really careful about getting in situations where anything is like our word versus somebody else's word, because then it's either up to public opinion or in some cases a court situation, and that is, you don't want to deal with that. Also, public opinion can be really nasty, especially everybody knows the internet is forever. It is much better. Boundaries can be really difficult too, because sometimes what happens is we don't know we need a boundary until something happens. And then we realize, okay, this is like a new situation, and I'm not sure where to cut this off. But it is much better to have established boundaries that you can evaluate than to suddenly realize you need boundaries. So part of the reason I'm bringing this up, because I know a lot of people don't think about boundaries, so you can kind of start to think about what your boundaries are. And part of that is like who you let close in your life, where you will spend time with people, that sort of thing. Don't let other people define your boundaries. Okay? And that's something abusive people will do. And a lot of these people are very good at this. They're good at word games. They're good at getting in your head. They will make you feel like you're wrong. When someone tries to treat you like that, you need to evaluate it and maybe not let them in your life. Like the guy I talked to, the guy I opened the story with, the beginning, the kidnapping, I am positive he had all the evidence he needed that woman was a psychopath before they got married and made kids. But for whatever reason, he ignored it, he dismissed it, he thought it was worth the risk. He ended up with a huge legal problem, unbelievable amount of stress. She literally tried to hire someone to kill him. That's obviously an extreme example, but you don't want to have to call someone like me and ask for help. That's not where you want your life to go. So just don't let other people define your boundaries. And that's something that, if that's a new idea or you're not sure what that means, you might have to have some conversations with your parents or some people you trust, Kyle, to help kind of figure out what I'm talking about. Emotionally healthy people will respect your boundaries. What that means is if you're hanging out with somebody and they want to do something you don't want to do and you tell them no, if they're emotionally healthy, they'll be like, that's cool, no problem, and they'll back off. If they keep pushing, you need to pay attention to that. Okay? And that's just, don't let people in your life that are going to take advantage of you and abuse you. Oop. Oop. Okay. Yeah, so like I talked about the girl that wanted to come into my apartment, absolutely do not let strangers into your living quarters. Now, as y'all go through life and you do things like buy houses and stuff, at some point, someone's going to come in your house to do work. You just have to pay attention to that. Pay attention to their behavior, body language, leave doors open. If you don't feel safe, and someone's coming to your house to do something, invite somebody else over to be there while they're there. Um, if you're, for the girls, if you're interacting with somebody and you don't feel safe for whatever reason, even if you're not dating someone, you can just lie and say you have a boyfriend. And that'll filter out a lot of people. You don't have to give any specifics or anything. Just mention like boyfriend casually. My boyfriend did this or my boyfriend did that. That'll shut a lot of people down. Or, particularly for the ones that are younger, say something about your dad. Okay, to say my dad did this. Part of that goes back to the presence thing. If people know there's people in your life that care about you, they're much less likely to try and manipulate you or take advantage of you. Okay, criminals select their victims. Abusive people select their victims. An abusive person or a criminal is much more likely to select as their victim someone who doesn't have good, strong family connections and good relationships in their life. Okay, they find those people, they isolate them. Sometimes they'll even make them feel loved, and then they'll go about their abuse or whatever they're doing. It can be very confusing emotionally and mentally. I know a lot of really horrible stories about this. Don't ever go someplace with people you're not certain you can trust. Okay, so if somebody wants to go hang out someplace that's not public and you're not sure, if they invite you to a house or something like that, tell them you got plans. Okay, just don't do it. Now, if somebody wants to meet you in public, you can kind of judge that, but don't go someplace private with people that you're not absolutely sure you can trust. Sometimes that can mean that. Sometimes that can even mean like you might trust the person. Like you might trust their intentions, but if you don't trust their judgment, you might not want to go someplace because they might create a situation that can be bad, or they might put you in a situation that can be bad, or they might know some other people you don't want to be around. That doesn't, you can, all kinds of things can happen. You can end up with like a weird drug charge on something because you give somebody a ride and you don't know that they do drugs. Way too many stories. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. This goes back to my whole thing about the interview. Criminals select their victims. They very rarely randomly attack people. It does happen. I know some examples of it, but over 90% of the time, even when you've got something really extreme, like they go into a restaurant and they start shooting people, even with those, they pick who they attack. It's almost never just random. And again, even in the wild, if you watch some nature programs, lions and tigers, they don't go after the strongest prey. They pick the prey they can get. A lot of human predators, I like to say they have small souls. They're really very weak people. Sometimes they're big and intimidating. A lot of them have strong personalities, but a lot of them are fundamentally broken, and they're not that difficult to overcome. That can be confusing for people because you see movies and television shows with the bad guys like the Terminator. That's just not accurate. A lot of these people, when they meet effective resistance, they're very weak. Okay. Do I have any more slides? Okay. How long are you going to let me click before you said no more slides? Okay. I've used almost all my words for the day. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? No questions. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Yeah, don't outsource your safety, and you got to be careful about trusting other people's judgment because sometimes people just want to have fun, and they may not mean any harm, but it can things can happen really fast. I mean, I know some, yeah. So, I'm glad you mentioned that. Anything else? Okay, I can take off the leash now. Thanks. I won't speak again until like Tuesday.
All right. Ugh. Hobble up to the stage. Okay. Well, thank you, Chad.
Appreciate it.
You know, it's a topic we don't talk a whole lot about. We don't talk about enough. But you know, as you read the Bible and you read the Gospels, you see how much Jesus cares about the vulnerable in society, the people who are prone to being picked on, prone to being attacked, and so on. And so I think it fits really well into that category of like, hey, we want to be representatives of justice in this world. And so not only do we need to be mindful, but you can take this same material and say like, oh, hey, I can do this for other people or even help other people learn. And so this is going to be online. It already is online. The live stream has been recording the whole time. So if you ever feel like, oh, man, I could use a refresher on this, it's there. You know, and Chad, like you said, you can always go talk to him. He does this stuff for a living. But part of why we're covering some of these kinds of things is because we live in a broken world. We live in a world where people's motives are not always good. And if you're anything like me, the tendency there is to assume, oh, hey, this person means no harm, this person means good, like to believe the best in people and to extend infinite almost amounts of grace. And so sometimes when we find ourselves in that position, we find ourselves opening ourselves up to being vulnerable, to being attacked and otherwise. Now, there's not a devil under every rock, but we want to be vigilant. You know, if there's anything to take away from this, any one singular thing that encompasses it all, it's to be watchful, to be mindful, to be thoughtful, and to put thought into where you go, who's around you, what people are doing, to be alert, to be aware, right? So at any time, feel free to talk to Chad, talk to me, any of us adult leaders, but we can definitely get you in contact with Chad if you'd like. He's a fun guy to sit and get coffee with and talk to. So I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to close us out. And remember, this is the last time there's at least 2 graduates in the room that you can go run over and smother them with hugs and tell them you miss them, because next Sunday all the newbies come in. He snuck in. All right, let's pray. Father God, thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this unique and interesting subject, God, and a much needed one. And so, God, we give you all the glory. We ask you to continue to help us be watchful, not only for ourselves, but for our friends and our loved ones, those around us, God, and to be people who stand for justice and stand for good, who represent you well in this world. We give you all the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.